All right, so we're going to start today with order of operations and some review of integer rules. So hopefully most of this is review for you. You might want to have open your Desmos scientific calculator to help you a little bit. But for the most part, we should be able to do most of this in our head. All right, so why don't you go ahead and take a look at these 4 problems and see if you can come up with some answers, and I will catch up with you. All right, let's see how you did. So -1 plus -3, that is -4. And 0 plus -12, of course, is -12. -4 plus -4, that is -8. Okay, now remember that when we're looking at negatives, here's 0, and here's -4. If I am adding another -4, that means from this location, I am going to be moving to the negative 4 more spots. So -5, -6, -7, -8. Okay? -8. -5 plus -3, hopefully you came up with -8. Now, here's where things change a little bit. Okay? So what happens when I have a negative and a negative? Well, technically, that is a -1. So that is a multiplication. A -1 times a -2, if you remember that a negative times a negative is actually a positive, this is actually 5 plus 2. 5 plus 2, so that would be 7. So the easiest thing to think about is if these 2 negatives are in a row, it's going to make a giant plus sign. Okay, it's going to make a giant plus sign, and the negatives disappear. So 0 minus a -6 becomes 0 plus 6, which is actually 6. Okay, now those 2 negatives have to be touching to do that. Now here's one that's different. These negatives are not touching. Okay, so -5 minus 2, that would be like going to the store, spending $5, and then going to another store and spending $2. Okay, so as a total, I have spent a -7. So this is really -5 plus a -2. Okay, -5 plus a -2. We actually can make use of something called keep, change, change when we see these negatives. Okay, so I can actually keep the first sign. I can change the next sign and change the next sign by adding in a second negative. So this becomes -9 plus a -3, which is -12. So sometimes it's easier to think about that in terms of keep, change, change. All right, so let's go over the keep, change, change again. Okay, keep, change, change. So when we see 2 negatives in a row, this is helpful also. Or if we just see the negatives. So this is a +5, so I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to change this one, and I'm going to change this one. So like we said, 2 negatives in a row actually becomes a positive. So this becomes 5 plus 3, which is 8. All right, we're going to keep it. We're going to change it. We're going to change it. Again, 2 negatives in a row makes a giant plus sign. So this is -4 plus 6. So it's like I have $6 and I'm going to spend 4 of it. Okay, I'm going to spend 4 of it. So that gives me a +2. That's my bigger number. Okay, now, -10 minus 3, negative. Well, I know that these 2 negatives in a row is going to make a giant plus sign. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. That sometimes is a little easier than having to deal with all these signs. And I'm going to go ahead and do keep, change, change here. So I'm going to keep the -10. I'm going to change this negative to a positive. And I'm going to add in a -3. So I kept it, I changed it, I changed it. plus 8. So negative 10 plus negative 3. This is a negative 13 plus 8. So I owe somebody $13. I paid them back 5. That leaves me with a negative 8. Okay, so now let's just review real quickly what it means when I have this negative on the outside, because it is super important that we understand what number is actually there. Because if I see something like this, I need to know what number is actually right there. Well, for those of you who are saying to yourself, well, that's a negative 1, you are right, okay? We're going to add in that negative 1. So now if I multiply, negative times a negative is a positive. So it's a positive 3. Now this one is negative 1 times a positive 5. Well, we know that a negative times a positive is actually a negative, okay? A negative. So a negative multiplied by a negative is a positive, but a negative and a positive is a negative. So we need to make sure that we remember those rules, okay? Okay, so here's the rules for adding and subtracting. Obviously, if I have 2 positives, it's a positive. If I have 2 negatives I'm adding, it's a negative. But if the positive number is bigger than the negative number, so for example, 5 plus a negative 2, my answer is going to be a positive 3 because this number is bigger, okay? Same thing happens if I switch those and I have a 2 plus a negative 5. This is the bigger number. So notice how the sign holds, okay? The sign holds. All right, let's do some multiplication. So negative 2 times 5. Is that going to be positive or is it going to be negative? If you said negative, you're correct. A negative times a negative. Remember, a negative and a negative make a giant plus sign. So that's a positive 30. And with division, the rules hold. So negative 18 divided by negative 3, and this is the same as this, okay? This is a division. Negative 18 divided by negative 3, that's a positive 6. And negative 15 divided by 5, that is a negative 3, okay? That's a negative 3. So keep in mind your order, okay, of positives and negatives. So if I have 1 negative, it's going to be negative. No matter which one, where it is, if it's first or second, if I have 1, it's going to be negative. If I have 3 negatives, it is also going to be negative because these 2 make a positive. So it really ends up being a negative times a positive. Okay, so odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, are going to be negative numbers, and evens are going to be positive. So if I had 4, 2, 3, 4, then that is positive because these 2 make a plus and these 2 make a plus. Okay? Okay, now let's take a look at order of operations. We're going to look at order of operations a little bit differently. I'm guessing that in middle school you may have talked about Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally or Purple Elephants Marching Down the Road. Maybe you remember something like that. Well, we're actually going to talk about order of operations using what we call gems. Okay, gems. So the G stands for grouping symbols. Okay, that is parentheses, brackets, braces. So those are always what we do first. Okay, we always do brackets or parentheses first. The E stands for exponents or powers. Okay, exponents or powers. So exponents or powers are going to come second. Now remember that this 5 squared, that is not equal to 10. Okay, that is not 5 times 2. This is 5 times 5, which is actually 25. All right, so remember that power or that exponent, those little numbers, that doesn't mean multiply. Okay, then we have multiply or divide, and we're always going to multiply left to right. Okay, we're going to always multiply left to right. So whoever comes first in order gets to go first. So if I see 15 divided by 3 times 5, this happens first, okay, because it's the first thing that I see. And then last but not least, I have adding and subtracting. Okay, adding and subtracting. And it is also left to right. Okay, now why do you think it would be important that we have an order of operations? Well, the easiest way to explain it, I think, is just think about how you make a peanut butter sandwich. You're going to start with bread. And then on top of your bread, you're going to put either your peanut butter or your jelly, and then you're going to do peanut butter or jelly and then another piece of bread. If I change the order and I start with peanut butter, then all of a sudden my hand is full of peanut butter and I have a mess. Okay, I have a mess. So order of operations, the reason it's important is because it gives us a procedure so that everyone solves the problem the same way. Okay, everyone solves the problem the same way. So it's really important that we understand order of operations because it's going to help us all the way through the school year. Okay, because we're going to see it constantly in terms of helping us to determine what gets to go first. Okay, so let's use this GEMS. So GEMS. And let's decide, as we're simplifying these, what gets to go first. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to look for is parentheses. We're going to start with this green problem. So I look for parentheses, and notice how I have a parenthesis here. So that means I'm going to do this part first. So 2 plus negative 3. Well, I know that is a negative 1. Okay, so that becomes a negative 1. The negative 3 is going to drop. Okay, so now I look at it, and I realize that negative 3 next to a parenthesis, that's actually multiply. So negative 3 times negative 1, that's a positive 3 because we know a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay? All right, let's move down to the blue one. All right, do we have parentheses again? Well, we actually have parentheses and we have brackets because we have these guys here and we also have these here. Okay, so when I have double parentheses or double brackets or grouping symbols, I'm always going to start on the inside first. So I'm going to start right there. Well, I know that a negative and a negative is actually a positive. So my 5 is going to drop. My negative 2 is going to drop, but the negative and a negative becomes a positive. The 6 drops. Okay, so I've done one step. Okay, now I go back. Do I have more grouping symbols? Yes, I do. This is where I'm going to go next. So negative 2 plus 6, that's going to give me a positive 4. Okay, that is a positive 4. So now I have the negative 5 or the positive 5 that's going to drop. All right, now looking at it, I do still kind of have parentheses, but better, more importantly, I have some multiplication because this is multiply, okay? Remember this positive 4, that really isn't there, isn't telling us to add anything. That is 5 multiplied by 4. So that is 20. Okay, that is 20. All right, go ahead and hit pause and see if you can figure out what you want to do first on this next problem. Okay, let's see how you did. So parentheses, I always start with parentheses. So I see 2 sets. I see this set and I see this set. Remember, we're always going to start on the inside. So I'm going to keep my sign with the number. Okay, keep the sign with the number. And I'm going to do this part right here. So negative 6 and negative 5, that is a positive 30. Positive 30. Everything else is going to drop. The 4 drops and the 3 drops. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I still have parentheses. All of these need to get added together. So that's going to be 36. The 3 drops. All right, now looking at it, I don't have any more grouping symbols per se where I have to do any more adding and subtracting. I don't have any powers, but I do have a multiplication. right there. So if I take 36 times 3, 3 times 6 is 18, carry 1, 3 times 3 is 9 plus 1, that is 108. So this is going to simplify to 108, okay? All right, now let's make sure we understand our powers, okay? So these are exponents or powers. Now, when I see this little 2, remember that is pronounced squared, okay? So that is 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared, 7 squared. So this does not mean 3 times 2, okay? This tells me how many 3's I have. So this is telling me I have 3 times 3. So 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. Same thing here. This is not 4 times 2. It is 4 times 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, let me show you on the Desmos calculator how we can do powers. So if I put in a 4, I want you to come over here and look at this a squared. So a squared, that's just going to square my number. See how I have 4 squared there? And you can see over here it's 16. Okay, so the next one that I had was 5 squared. So 5 squared, that is 25. The next one was 7 squared. That's 49. So I have 25 minus 49. Notice this negative sign dropped, okay? This negative sign drops. So 25 minus 49, 25 minus 49 brings me to a negative 24. Negative 24. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working on your homework today. Work through your process. Try to do your steps by steps. Try to not use the calculator a ton today. Try to use your brain instead. We will be doing more with the calculator on the next video. Have a good rest of the day.